QSO Today, episode 521, Walt Hudson K4OGO. This episode of QSO Today is listener-sponsored. Only you can keep the QSO Today podcast coming to you every weekend since 2014, with the exception of the last few weekends. Please become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor banner on the show notes page or at the top of the QSOtoday.com webpage under Donate. Since the last episode, the following hams are listener sponsors. Rick Schwartz, K8HEF, $100 annual. Dave Okrent, W7DAO, $100 yearly. Danny Wilson, KF7Z, $67. Adrian Lambert, M5ADL, $10. Larry Classy, W4LEC, $10. William Gwaltney Jr., WA4GK, $10 monthly. John Grusel, KC9OJV, $10 monthly. Mike Rensman, 13R042, $10 monthly. Jack White, 86TW, $10 monthly. Jerry Rector, K4OAM, $10 monthly. Joey Smith, N4VFA, $10 monthly. Mark Farrell, VK6OP, $10 monthly. And J. Gordon Betty Jr., W2TTT, $10 monthly. We received donations from these hams. Stuart Thorpe, K7PWS, $100. John Black, K7IIA, $110. Stephen Kramer, KD6KXT, $5. Samuel Tonseth, KI7CDG, $10. Tommy LeBeau, K4VTE, $15. James Leonard, KA6KSN, $5. Todd Mitchell, N0IP, $10. Brian Whitcomb, K7KX, $10. There were anonymous donors, and we thank them for their support of QSO Today. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, amateur call sign 4Z1UG, where I demonstrate the diversity and relevance of the amateur radio hobby and its impact on society by interviewing ham radio operators, many of whom played vital roles in shaping our technology through the amateur radio hobby. And while many people might say, ham radio? Do people still do that? This podcast demonstrates through in-depth interviews just how amazing, diverse, and dynamic the amateur radio hobby continues to be. While there is never a dull moment in Israel, especially under the current circumstances, combined with the beautiful weather and the Jewish New Year's holidays, truthfully, I was unable to book additional guests during this period, and combined with the mysterious back injury and other health-related problems, I couldn't pull off the missing episodes. Getting older is like an avalanche. As the song says, flying high in April, shot down in May. That's life. I have my tests lined up to figure out how I hurt my back and what's to be done about it. I do have new bookings coming up, and I'm very excited to make these new interviews. Walt Hudson K4OGO has always lived by and had a love of the sea, pursuing a career in shipbuilding, beginning in Portsmouth, Virginia. While he always had an interest in radio, including Citizens Band radio, it wasn't until just a few years ago that Walt became a ham radio operator. Since he is always near the shore, operating portable QRP SSB from the water's edge and making DX contacts is what excites him. K4OGO loves to experiment with vertical antennas on the beach to fine-tune his technical and operating skills. K4OGO is my QSO Today. K4OGO, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Walt?
I'm here, Eric, 4Z1UG. This is K4OGO. How you doing?
I'm very good. Now, Walt is sitting in his portable Jeep studio talking to me today on Google Meets. I can see Walt in his Jeep, and he can see me in my office here in Efrat. Walt, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Sure. My ham radio story, I almost want to just call it a radio story. I haven't been a ham that long. I've only been a ham for about 5 years. I think 2020 is when I got my license, but I really started in the radio hobby very young. I've been a shortwave listener, a medium wave DXer, And then I got caught up in the 11-meter CB world there in the mid 70s, like everybody else did. And have always been kind of a radio guy, a tinkerer in electronics. I remember in the 90s, I lived in the Navy town of Norfolk, Virginia. I would go to the surplus place and get parts and build stuff. In the 90s, I found a parabolic dish and built for about $125. I had satellite TV in the backyard, and all my neighbors probably hated me because I had what we called the big ugly dish. But as time went on and on, I just loved. I would build dipole antennas for shortwave. I built box loops for my AM reception, and was always really into it. I don't know why. I guess back then it was like, I don't know if I had the time and the energy to learn Morse code or whatever. And then as ham radio evolved into the no code thing, I always said I was going to do it. Finally, I said, you know what, I'm going to go for it. And in 2020, I took, studied, got the tech, and 2 weeks later got the general because I really wanted to be an HF guy. And so my ham radio journey is a young one. It's only about, like I said, 5 years old, coming up on 5 years, not even. And that's just because I wanted to do it. I loved HF. I love shortwave. I love, medium wave and that type of thing. So it's kind of why I'm a voice guy. It's just where I really love the fact of the human voice over the air, hearing it a long distance, or what we used to call back in the CB days, shooting skip or what have you. Just really been into that. And I wanted that when I first got my license. I had every intention. I said, I'm going to take the tech test just to get in the door and immediately take the general, which I did. I don't think I made a QSO for the first 2 or 3 weeks as a ham because I was waiting until I could add that AG at the end of it. And then I went a couple years and then went ahead and got the extra. After that, I think I got the extra 23, I guess it was. So I'm coming up on 2 years for that. So I'm fairly a young ham as far as I'm not a young man, but a newer ham radio operator.
You're probably born in the 60s.
62.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Portsmouth, Virginia. It's right across the harbor from Norfolk. And we lived, as a kid, we lived right on the water. I could look out my window. At the time, we had like a little beach across the street from us. And so I always, it's kind of why I'm into the coastal waves and wires thing. I've always lived right by the sea or right by or within the harbor. It's funny. I remember, I guess it would have been about 70, 71, 8, 9 years old. I got, I don't know if you guys remember the Panasonic ball. It was got like a little round ball and chain looking AM radio. It was a novelty item that the kids all had. And I had this radio, and I would sit in my bedroom at night and tune around the AM dial. And just amazing what I would, you would get the 50,000 watt, mega stations across the United States and all that. And I really got into, I guess what we would call DXing. Well, my grandparents were farmers in central North Carolina, well inland, and I would spend my summers on the farm with them and take the radio with me. And I something triggered me real early in life that, wow, and they were out in the clear. There was no noise pollution or anything there. It was in a farm in the middle of nowhere. I could still get some stations or whatever, but I noticed then that there's something about being next to this salt water. And so I think that's been ingrained in my psyche for a long time. And then, now as an adult and even, going through, engineering or whatever, I start, I kind of got an understanding of ground and what, and what the salt water was doing. So that's kind of why, I say I'm a young ham, but I've had that interest in radio next to salt water for a long time.
What did your father do? Why were you guys in Portsmouth?
It's funny. He started out like I did. He was an apprentice in a shipyard, and he was in what was called a mold loftsman. So he would make the patterns to cut the plate, to shape things. And a lot of people that came through the lofting side of apprenticeship of a shipyard end up being designers. You know what I mean? They move over into the drafting world where they sit at a table and draw parts and put the instructions together to build ships. So my father was I'll just say, for lack of a better term, a shipbuilder. My grandfather was a shipbuilder. My great-grandfather was a shipbuilder. It's kind of like here I am. I do the same thing. And that also led to, is like right now, I travel a lot with my job. My dad did the same thing. I grew up in Portsmouth, but there was a couple times I know work was slow or whatever. We lived down on the Gulf Coast for a while as an older, adolescent. We lived in Pascagoula, Mississippi on the Gulf Coast, and gave me a little bit of that grits and gumbo New Orleans flair, because we were all our radio market and everything was New Orleans. I'm actually, my sports teams are all New Orleans because that's kind of when I was formed, for American football and what have you there, So yeah, and then we moved back to Virginia, but getting back to my dad and me, we do the same thing. And he's my dad's still around. He's 84, retired, but me working in the shipyard, he calls me all the time. What are you working on? What are y'all building now? What's going on? He wants to know all. He still lives his shipbuilding career through me.
It's very possible that at one time our older audience probably remembers when America was probably king of shipbuilding. Maybe compared to the British were well known for making ships, but the United States as well, especially I think during World War II, lead up to America's entry into World War II, they were building thousands of ships. What kind of ships are they building in Portsmouth when you were growing up as a kid?
Actually, Portsmouth had a repair yard, Norfolk Naval Shipyard, which was more of a repair yard, but across from us and where my dad, as a matter of fact, I'm a fourth generation family member to work there, Newport News Shipbuilding. We built the carriers. I think it is actually the largest shipbuilder in the world, Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Corporation. And it's gone through a couple of iterations where people like bigger companies have bought them and what have you. But they're builders of aircraft carriers and submarines. I've enjoyed that part, but over my career now, 44 years. I've kind of contracted around and worked at different shipyards around the country, and for that matter, around the world. Right now, I'm currently up in Rhode Island, and we're building ferries, car ferries for the state of Maine. So it's a little bit different than what I've done. I've worked mostly for, defense. I've designed and worked and built ships for the American Navy, the Royal Navy, the Royal Australian Navy, the Canadian defenses. As a matter of fact, other countries there in your location as well. So I've gotten to do a lot of really neat things because I've been that guy. I'm more of a field engineer. I start the project in the design room with the other engineers, but because my background was more of a technology and not a theory, the deep theory of engineering. I was more the technology guy. I'm the guy they send out in the field when they're building, and I get yelled at by the guys because the drawings won't work. You know what I mean? So I solved the problem of being the field engineer guy, and it's been really great because I've got to do some really amazing travel to go on site as something's being built and communicate back and forth between the builder, the designers, which usually aren't always in the same location.
You grow up in this family of shipbuilders. What was the step that you took out of high school in order to join them? What kind of education did you need in order to become involved in the shipbuilding other than, I guess you could have entered as a welder or as a riveter or something like that, but it doesn't seem to me that's where you went. You kind of went into the design. How did that take place for you?
Going to high school in Portsmouth, Virginia, you could see the shipyard almost from my high school. Look out the window. The running joke was when you graduated from high school, in my high school, you got a diploma and an application to the shipyard.
You're a company town.
Yeah, and we were culturally, we were just ingrained. You were going to work in the shipyard. So it kind of had that. My high school itself had a lot of technical classes in it, and I took drafting for 4 years, and was really into drawing, and probably because that was where at that time what my dad was doing, and so I did that. Graduated from high school on a Friday, and then Monday morning went right into an apprenticeship, a shipyard apprenticeship, where it was a 3-year apprenticeship where I was learning the trades, but always knew when I applied to that I wanted to get into design. So I started out, I went down in the cold in the middle of the winter and got cold and hammered on some plate or whatever, learned that side of it. Finally kind of migrated into what's called lofting, where we would loft out on the big floor, loft out patterns to build parts for the ships. And then, after went through the whole thing and came out the other end, I graduated with a kind of like a journeyman certificate in shipbuilding and marine drafting. So as I did that, became a marine designer per se and a marine drafter, and would sit there at the table all day drawing parts for ships. I was in the structures and the hull side, so things that had shape, like the hull itself, the shaped hull. If you've seen like these I love seeing old school lines plans that are the form of the ship. I did lines plans and what was called shell expansions and that type of stuff. Not per se the designer itself. I would get the naval architects would give me a set of like a table of offsets, and then I would just lay them all out and lay out the lines plans for them to build the ships. That was cool. I was still a young man, and I wanted to further my career in shipbuilding. So this is in the very early 80s and into the 90s. At that time, remote school was not a very big thing, like it is now. And I went into a program. It was called the West Lawn School of Yacht Design, which was a total, home study type thing. And it took me about 3 years to get through what should have been an 18-month program. But the cool thing about that is I learned the engineering side of it, the technical form of naval architecture, some structural engineering, a little bit farther than what I was doing, and came out of that with a certificate in naval architecture and yacht design. So that kind of furthered me as far as then became the guy that wasn't just the drafter sitting up there drawing pictures. As it kind of helped me progress my career in the shipyards and the design offices that I work for. It's like, hey, all right, this kid understands it. So at that point, that's where I kind of evolved in becoming a field engineer and going out on the ships more and not just sitting at the drawing board. I kind of became the guy that went in back and forth between the drawing room and the guys pounding steel. And let's go all the way back to when I first started as an apprentice. I could communicate with those guys because, you know what, I sat there in the cold with a hard hat on, eating lunch out of a lunchbox with them. So I had a real good rapport with them. And it's really helped me in my career as a shipbuilder to understand people, from what we call fire watch, the guy that just sits there all day doing nothing but making sure he's safety, that nothing catches on fire, all the way to the guy that welds and bends metal and, the whole aspect of shipbuilding. I've kind of got a great, a good general knowledge of everything that goes on. They say people, we call each other this. Once you hit the 40-year mark, you're a master shipbuilder. I kind of think that's a little over the top, but theoretically, I'm a master shipbuilder. That's what I do.
Do you have models of the ship in various ways so that at a much smaller scale, you've kind of built the ship so you kind of understand how it goes in place? And are those models used by the people actually assembling the ship to be able to make sure all the pieces go in the right place?
Yes, we do. As a matter of fact, I've evolved down to that path as well. Since mid-90s, I've watched everything go from drawing on the board by hand into the CAD world, the computer-aided design world. And now, it's interesting you say models, because that's exactly what we do. We call it the digital twin. So we take the digital twin as we're building that entire vessel in a 3D CAD environment. And there it is in the computer. We can peel off parts of it, print it out, and give it to the guys working. But every ship that's being built right now has a digital twin that basically a cyber the same thing in it, which helps you too down the road. Like once we finish, let's just say that we're building 2 ferries right now. When these ferries are finished and we deliver them to their owners, we still contain the digital twin. If they ever have a problem with it or want to change something, make a mod or whatever, they come to us and to our 3D CAD environment, the digital twin, and we can make changes or whatever. Or if there's a problem, we can go look in our twin and see, okay, oh, yep, that's too close to that or whatever. So, that's it's interesting you say that. Models are really, probably in a lot of industry now, the 3D model environment is huge. It really is.
The process of building the ship hasn't changed over 100 years. You still have to form metal. You still have to bond it together in some way. You're still putting power plants in the way you did before. Maybe those power plants are different. I'm assuming most of them are electric power plants that run on diesel engines or nuclear engines or whatever.
Yeah, I think I've seen it. It's way before me, but I've watched some of we call it stick building. Some guys, the old school way, they would just take a plan and build it like you build a house or whatever. Now everything's done it's modular construction, kind of like Legos. So we'll take the ship after it's designed and break it into modules and build each little module like off to the side and then just bring it all together like Legos, if that makes sense. So modular construction is kind of how that is the way and pretty much the only way ships are built now, through modular construction.
So if you're building a car-carrying ferry, how many employees are working on that ferry in order to build that ship? What's the timeline for building that ship? Does it take a few years to build it, or do you have enough people that you actually could build it faster?
We have I believe about 80 employees. It's about a 24-month, about a 2-year process. For after trials, everything's shut down, it's over and delivered to the owner. For a ferry, I would say about 24 months. Now you get to warships, wow, we're talking sometimes years, 4 years, 5 years. A carrier, even longer. It just depends. It depends on the workforce, the contract. Sometimes when if the Navy or a Navy wants it faster, you get a shipyard that's working 3 shifts round the clock, 24 hours a day to get it out faster. A lot of that is contractual, but like what I'm doing right now, a regular 8 to 10 hour day environment, building a ferry, it's about a 2-year process.
And for the people who are younger that are thinking about some kind of future, maybe building ships, what's the entry level? Are there enough people that are entering the shipbuilding business to allow companies like the one that you work for to continue building ships?
It's a struggle. I tell you what, I'm watching right now the American shipbuilding industry. Everybody's behind, everybody's delayed. We're struggling to get things out because it's just that a lot of people now aren't going down the path that I did. Becoming a shipbuilder. The opportunities are there. You go to a shipyard. If you're a young man and you want to get into shipbuilding, there are opportunities out there. You go to any shipyard if you're living in the area or near a shipyard and get in through either an apprenticeship program or just a general laborer, getting in and getting up with somebody and learning the trade, the old-fashioned way is just being a helper. There's a lot of opportunities out there. Where I'm at in design, we call them now, and I don't want this to be derogatory, but we call them etch-a-sketch kids. They're coming out of the 2-year computer-aided design world, and they're just working in a computer environment, and they didn't like, I guess, I don't even pick on them, but like us old salts that were out there hammering plate or we consider ourselves shipbuilders. There is a gap. And as guys like me, I'm 62, I'm probably going to retire in five years or so. As we're fading away, we're watching the industry struggle because of the loss of talent of old guys that grew up our way. So shipbuilding's going through a big change right now, trying to figure themselves out as what's going to happen. Like I just said earlier, we have the digital twin and going into the digital age and all that, which is really streamlining processes and making things faster. But there's the heart and soul, and some of the things that you just the only way you learn is by doing. That side of shipbuilding, I'm seeing it fade away, and I really feel like that's why we're so delayed in delivery right now, is because a lot of the older guys, and I'm probably saying this because I am one of those older guys, but a lot of these guys are retiring and leaving that knowledge base is fading away.
Do you think there's maybe a generational resistance to starting at the bottom? You have the Etch-a-Sketch guys, for example, who have a 2-year maybe Associate of Arts degree or something like that in CAD design. Is there perhaps resistance to saying, hey, you know what, as part of your apprenticeship, we'd like you out there on the deck hammering plate and doing fitting or whatever it is that has to be done, so that you, when you go back to the CAD terminal, you actually have an understanding of what it is that we're actually doing and what we're building. Is there resistance to that in terms of this generation doing that?
There is, and it's I don't know if they call me a boomer or whatever, but I don't know if the boomers are at fault for, raising kids that, want instant gratification or whatever. And I think the American university system has created a thing where everybody's got to have a master's degree, and it's all about where you're at, your diploma. We've been so degree driven that the trades. I mean, I'll be honest with you. There was a time when I was like, man, I'm like, kind of was embarrassed that I didn't have a master's degree in engineering or an MBA and all that stuff like everybody else. Where we're at now, as far as industry and whatever, I'm proud to say that I came through the trades and learned to trade, and then, had a thirst for more knowledge and went that route. But I think that this, and I have a 31-year-old son who's a hard worker and has done a lot of stuff too. And I've watched him, and I think he got that from me, seeing, me working sometimes 6 or 7 days a week or whatever to get a project done, seeing that. But I think the world right now, or at least what I see here in the States, this generation, and I hate to talk bad about them, but man, they just don't want to seem like they want to roll up their sleeves and jump into something like, being a welder or being a ship fitter or a pipe fitter, or that type of thing, because, I don't know. I don't want to say they're soft. I just think that we kind of have a mindset now where go to university, get your degree, and get rich,
Do you think that the fear that they have, at least starting in the trades like this, is perhaps a fear of failure? It looks daunting. If you're looking at an aircraft carrier and saying, look, 400 guys built this, and they're like one of 400, and they're saying, well, I can't do that, and I can't do that because I could fail, versus not wanting to get into it because perhaps you're going to get your elbows dirty.
I think it's the elbows dirty. I think hard work is people don't appreciate the feeling you get from working hard. I know, like, there's a class of ship here, an American class of ship called the Arleigh Burke class. They're destroyers, and they come in and out of the harbors wherever I go in the world. Well, I worked back when we were building them. I worked for Bath Iron Works in Bath, Maine. That's where the Arleigh Burke, the DDG 51 was built. And for an entire year and a half, all I worked on was the mast, all of the structure to form the mast of that ship. I was like paperwork, sketches, going inside. We were, just building that thing and putting the mast together. This huge warship, and all I did was for a year and a half was worked on this structure, this mast structure. And that was what, 1989, 90, 91, right around there. I was, right at 30 years old. Now every time I see that ship or one of it, there's a bunch of them in the class, probably 50 of them built now. As I see one come in the harbor, I look at that mast. And I got just pride. My wife and my son's 30 years old now. His whole life, he's like, my dad built that mast right there. You know what I mean? Like, because you have that pride from that little part that you had. And I think that's something that that the younger group they don't see that anymore. I mean, it's like I said, maybe it's the instant gratification, or they want a bigger world or whatever. But you got to I take pride in that one little small piece of that ship that I built. Yeah, I don't know if that exists anymore with people. It's kind of, things are changing.
And now this mid-show break. The QSO Today project that now includes 500 episodes of the QSO Today podcast, the curation of hundreds of hours of QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo presentations for public consumption, is now supported completely by you, the listeners. I am using a business model called Value for Value, a concept developed by Adam Curry, K5ACC, where you contribute to QSO Today exactly what you think its value is to you. Value for Value. This mid-show break and the promotion of the Ham Radio Workbench podcast later in the show are the only commercials that interrupt the program. QSO Today has no commercial sponsors to influence the content, direction, and editorial content of the QSO Today project, which exists solely for the promotion of the amateur radio hobby. Those of you that have listened to over 500 podcast episodes know that I'm not only infatuated by the amateur radio hobby, but by the people who perpetuate it as well. The hours that I dedicate to QSO Today is a half-time job, Your support at any level pays for all of the technology that I use to create, produce, host, and deliver the QSO Today podcast and the project to the ham radio community. And while it is a labor of love, it costs money. I know from statistics and surveys that only 6% of you actually contribute to QSO Today in some form. Please make a generous donation using the slider to set the amount of your donation. Make that donation monthly to ensure that QSO Today is here for the next 500 episodes. As a value-for-value donation, it should be in the amount that you value each episode of QSO Today, or your access to our amazing catalog of ham radio educational videos found on YouTube, Vimeo, and using our own player link in the show notes page. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually. Use my Amazon link in the right column of the QSO Today website before shopping on Amazon. Promote QSO Today to your friends and family by forwarding our email and social media posts. Subscribe to our mailing lists. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Tell your friends. All of these actions are value for value. Keep the QSO Today project alive by taking action now. We return to our QSO Today. Thanks for this journey through this part of your professional life. I'm fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by anything these days that Mike Rowe talks about, for example, in Dirty Jobs, because I see, even here, that there's so many opportunities for young people to be in the utility industry or in the building industry or whatever, that they overlook it. And all of these employers are screaming for help just to keep the infrastructure of society running. So thank you for that. Let's talk about ham radio now. You've kind of synthesized this love of the sea, the smell of the ocean air with your ham radio operating. So how do you operate now, Walt, when you decide that you're going to operate ham radio? Where do you take it?
I like to get, obviously, by the water, by salt water. I love it because of I can go down with low power, and I have an advantage that all these guys with the big beams and the Moxon antennas and the hex beams and all, you hear all that, and all I'm doing is putting a little piece of 16 gauge wire on the side of a pole with some electrical tape, and I get that advantage of that gain from salt water. I really found when I was growing up and kind of learning about the effect of salt water on a radio signal, I've over the years, you try to find some deep research on it, some like theory, as we per se, and I still think that there's some science there that hasn't really been unveiled. I've been looking. It seems recently I purchased a couple old, I should say old 15, 16-year-old textbooks that are kind of moved to the wayside in oceanography, because the physical oceanography and the surface of the ocean, I'm really now, as an old man, really starting to do a deep dive into it, because from what I've always known about, what it did for me, the radio signal or whatever, I'm kind of finding now that I want to learn more. And I think that's one of the beauties of ham radio, is that we're always learning. You never stop learning. Who would have thought that this guy that builds ships and is, pounded metal and sits at a drawing board or whatever, would now be cracking open an oceanography textbook and looking into the physical properties of the geomagnetic surface of the ocean or whatever. But that's the beauty of ham radio, is kind of, for me, and I keep going down and finding another avenue of something that I want to figure out. And I think that's the one thing about ham radio is so beautiful. If you're a guy up in the mountains or the hills, or you're VHF, UHF, HF, there's just so many avenues that this hobby just encompasses. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. I really want to figure out. I want to be the guy that gives to the ham radio world more knowledge about operating by salt water.
I see that you operate by salt water in a couple of ways. I see that you'll take off your shoes and you'll take the whole rig down to the water's edge and you'll set up. And I also see that you'll operate from your Jeep from a pier or something like that. Let's take the first one. What's the ideal rig for the guy that wants to take off his shoes, walk down the beach to the water's edge, and work ham radio? For you, what's the ideal rig for that?
For me, the ideal rig is to get a big plastic bucket that's waterproof from the bottom of the inside of that bucket, something that can run off of small power. I have a little small 6 amp hour battery that fits almost in my hand here. And you don't need great power. I right now, everyone kind of gives me a hard time because I'm really crazy about the Xiegu G90, which is a 20 watt rig. I love that radio. So for me, a small battery, that little 20 watt G90 rig, and then just a telescopic pole that you can put up and some wire. I mean, it's real easy to build. If let's just say you want to operate on 20 meters, for lack, we'll keep it metric, a 5 meter wire, which is a quarter wavelength, tape it to the pole, put a coax to it, banana clip or weight somehow to connect at the bottom at the feed point. And with salt water, one little wire that just on the beach, just get it in the wet sand. You don't get under the salt water, just get that, I call it kissing the salt water. And it's just amazing the things that you can do. I mean, I can sit on the beach. Like right now I'm in Rhode Island. I can sit on the beach in Rhode Island with my 20 watts and break pileups in the mornings. There's on 20 meters, there's people, it's called the Southern Cross Net, where people from Australia, New Zealand, and Pacific are talking to North America. And I hear guys that are, hex beams and, 100 watts, 500 watts or whatever. And here, my little 20 watt rig with a wire on a pole sitting by salt water, you hear the pile up, and I'll go K4 or Kilo 4 Oscar Golf Oscar, and then out of nowhere, I mean, you wouldn't expect it, but the guy will come back as Kilo 4 Oscar Golf Oscar. Come back, you break pileups, and you realize that there's some magic there. There's something going on with that salt water that's making me, with my little 20 watt radio, break through. So getting back to your question, what do you need? You don't need a lot. You just need a small radio that's efficient. I like my G90. I've used other radios. A pole and a wire and a bucket to carry it all down in the beach with you, maybe a chair to sit in. And it's so simple. It's almost primitive, but it's a lot of fun.
Unlike soda, for example, where you're going to a summit, the size and weight of the rig as you're carrying it down. And when you're talking about a bucket, you could be talking like one of these buckets that has the lid on it, like that cucumbers come in or something like that.
Yeah, I'm talking like, I guess they're like called 5-gallon paint buckets or something like that. I got that for a reason. I get it. There's a hardware store here that sells them for, painting, whatever. I do that for a reason, because when I get down there, things are damp. I can set it down and kind of look at my surrounding and find a dry area, because you don't want to get sand and everything else in your rig. And that's another reason why I kind of, when you say, what do you need? I wouldn't go down there with a high dollar expensive, high priced rig, because, you're in an environment where over time, like I'm on my second G90 now, the first one still works and it's okay. But I can look at it and I can just see where it's been sandblasted across the face of the screen, and I can shake it right now and shake sand out of it, because it was a tool. But I used it on the beach for probably 3 years, and out of 3 years, I think I bought it for $400 US. I got my 3 years worth out of it, and it still works. I'll probably end up taking it apart and just cleaning it up and still use it. But that's kind of one recommendation. If you want to do like I'm doing and do a lot of beach portable ops, don't take the risk, and don't think you got to get a high dollar rig. It's kind of why I like the G90 so much. And I go down there also, you see these little like small like USDR, USDX radios and stuff like that. It's a good thing to have if you don't want to, if you risk it. Buy you $100 radio and go down. I've done that as well, and it works. You can have some fun with it. You really can.
Now, do you find that the signal is directional? Is it directional in the direction of the ocean, or do you find that just being there on the shore gives you a nice omnidirectional signal?
It gives you an omnidirectional signal. It really does. Like right now, the area I've been operating mostly is right off the Narragansett Bay, and I'm facing west. So I can put that one wire almost straight due west of me and still make contacts into behind me to Europe with it and do that type of thing. Although I will say I'm more and more believing that there is a lobe in the direction of that one counterpoise, because like I said, talking to Australia, from where I'm at here in Rhode Island, straight, I guess 180 almost straight out is the direction, over the Great Circle to Australia for me. So I noticed that I have amazing signal strength in that direction. Although, like I said, I can still make contacts behind me. I guess like the guys with the big rigs are going off the back of the beam, you know what I mean? I'm off the back of the counterpoise wire the other way. It works.
If you had a choice of one antenna to take with you to the beach, that would be the vertical with a wire taped to it?
Absolutely. I've got a couple that are, everyone of you've heard the Ribicoff antenna, which is a 7.6 meter wire straight up. This is 25 feet in Imperial. 4-to-1 on at the bottom. You need a tuner. All you're doing there's some loss and you're losing something. But with that, you can tune 40, 20. You can tune any band from 40 to 10 meters. It's kind of funny that it's called the Ribicoff, which it means, the fisherman antenna. I believe it was designed, really, he stumbled across an Italian ham who ended up naming it the Ribicoff, and now he's in Africa. I forget his call sign, but the guy that kind of stumbled across and made that popular. When I discovered that antenna, I started using that, and that was great. To me, I call it the bazooka, man, the most awesome vertical antenna I've ever used, portable on the beach, is a half wave for 20 meters, a vertical 20-meter half wave. I use a 49-to-1 on it, and really with that one, it's not even about the counterpoise wire. It's just being next to the salt water. But I have made on that antenna some of the most amazing contacts, and I can tell that there's just something, I guess it's the takeoff angle of a half wave, that antenna in general. 20 meters. I am a 20-meter guy in the daytime. In the mornings, my favorite time to operate is early morning on 20 meters. I love it. As we all will see, like when I first started, 4 or 5 years ago, where we were at in the solar cycle, it was all about 20 meters. And now as we're going up, lately, I've really done a lot with 10, 12, and 15. Enjoy those as well. But getting back to that antenna, that 20-meter antenna, I don't know if it's because I love the 20-meter band so much, but it's just, that's one to try for sure. But getting back to the beach itself, I keep going off on tangents, I apologize. Getting back to the beach itself, a vertical. Just investigate vertical antennas and get a vertical up by the ocean or by the sea, and you're going to be rocking and rolling.
Your counterpoise wire, which is the ground side of the antenna, if it's a vertical antenna, you have one or do you have lots of those? I saw that on one of your, maybe it was a TikTok video, you actually had a chart with different numbers of ground radials, 1, 2, 4, 10, 64, even showing, potential gain that you get from that. What's the ideal number of radials for a portable operator like you? Where do those go? Do they go into the water or do they just go off to the side?
If I'm next to the water but not on the beach and not in the water, I try to get at least a wavelength down. That chart, I remember, that chart was some research I did from Rudy Severns. He's an antenna guy. He's got a lot of text out there. Callum McCormick, the ex-commander there in England. I'm a big fan of his and watched a lot of his stuff and study his stuff by his polls. I like Callum a lot. He's a character. But studying those guys and what the understanding I've gained from them on counterpoise wires, kind of put that chart together from trying to simplify things. For me, if I'm away off the water, I try to put at least a wavelength down. So let's just say I'm going to operate on 20 meters, 4 or 5 meter counterpoise wires, which is a wavelength down. As they always say, the more the merrier. For me, portable ops, you don't have time to put down a lot of counterpoise wires. That's why I've noticed, if you look at some of the older stuff I did, I'd go down to the beach and I'd have counterpoise wires everywhere, and then have people walking all around me. It was just difficult. And people would say, you only need one by salt water. And I was like, okay, I learned by doing there, and I started using one. I was like, I'm really not noticing the difference. I'm still making some incredible, contacts with one counterpoise wire. And then, like we just said earlier, I've kind of noticed, though, that there obviously is a lobe in the direction of that wire. Maybe there's, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 dB gain in that direction, but still I'm getting out omnidirectional around me. The understanding I have right now, as I go deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole, I might learn more and figure more out. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Well, the United States and Canada are blessed with tens of thousands of miles of beachfront. Is there any specific criteria, if you're looking for a place to operate and you're in a new area like you are right now, is there some checklist that you have for the kind of beach that you want in order to be able to operate successfully?
Yeah, I try to find a spot in the summertime, especially doesn't have a lot of people. Like here, what I've noticed here in Rhode Island is I try to find rocky spots because where all the rocks are at, the people aren't. And the nice, beautiful sandy beach, everyone's there. So I kind of do that. I've learned the very hard way. I've learned to check the tide charts before I go out and operate portable. I've literally had, gone out in this low tide, not realize it. And, 10, 15 minutes in, I'm backing up. So that's one thing I do. I check the tide charts. And one thing I've found about beaches, especially like down, I've operated most of my operations have been Virginia Beach and down on the Outer Banks of North Carolina is I go to a surfer beach. Like, the beaches down there are roped off for surfers and then they're roped off for swimmers. I get over where the surfers are at because doesn't have people jumping in and out of the water. Those guys are out there, surfing. They're away from me. And it's funny, with surfers, they'll come up to me and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I say, "You're surfing those waves. I'm surfing the radio waves." It gives me a chance to kind of explain what's going on. And when you start talking about salt water and the whole thing, they're like, "Oh, dude, this is so cool." You know what I mean? So kind of like it makes me like friends of the ocean or whatever you're going to say it. I kind of get some camaraderie with surfers when I go out in beaches that are in the summer, when it's crowded. The surfer guys kind of like they kind of allow me in their community. They're like, "All right, man, I'm going to have fun," whatever. Whereas when you're over where people are at, I've had people come up to me and goes, "Hey, what are you doing? My kids are going to be walking through here in a minute," and all that, you know what I mean? And you're like, "Oh man, it's just not worth the problem," So yeah, you have to find your spots. It takes a little bit of work. And then I usually find that I'll find a location and I start going to that location quite a bit. If you look back through some of the places I've activated, I kind of get on a spot and go there for a month or two, and then I'll go find another one and go there as well, and just kind of bounce around and check out different beaches, different locations. I will say this is a question I get all the time. You were just saying that Canada, the United States, and all the shoreline we have. One of the questions I get is, "Hey, I live on the Great Lakes. Can I do this on the Great Lakes?" And I always have to say, I'm sorry. I was just like, it's just that the salinity of the water there, you're going to probably get the advantage of not having noise around you and, a clear open space, almost like being in a park out in the plains or something away from people. But that what we call the saltwater amplifier, that magic is just not as magical on the Great Lakes. And I know that from experience. I was working up in a shipyard in Marinette, Wisconsin, in Green Bay, and then into Lake Michigan. I went up there and tried to do the same thing I do on the ocean in the salty bays or whatever. And that amazing DX just didn't happen for me like it does by saltwater.
And now this mid-show break. Every 2 weeks, I listen to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast with George, KJ6VU, Vince, VE6LK, Mark, N6MTS, Thomas, K4SWL, Michael, VA3MW, and Rod, VA3ON, and their guest on often topical and important projects in amateur radio. This discussion amongst the regulars and their guests remind me of the conversations that I used to listen to on 146.94 and 146.46 megahertz in Orange County, California, while working on my own workbench almost 50 years ago. It is amazing how much practical ham radio knowledge that we can absorb by listening to the Workbench podcast that starts to make sense when we start our own deep dive into our own projects. So join me by listening to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast now and as George and crew push beyond 200 episodes. You can get to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast by clicking on the banner in this week's show notes page. And now, back to our QSO. I saw that you actually built an antenna using a couple of slinkies.
Yes.
What I'm curious about with a slinky antenna, is it resonant by the length of the coils or the actual length of the wire? Can you vary the frequency of the antenna by how compressed the springs are of the slinky?
I treated that antenna. I built that antenna two different ways. I built a vertical slinky, and when I first
center fed.
Yeah, when I first started the vertical slinky, almost like with a ground plane under the first one I built with I used the giant slinky. My mindset was a random wire antenna. We use a 9-to-1 on a random, and I was just kind of hoping, just a shot in the dark, that it wouldn't be resonant on any, like you need for a random wire antenna, that I could bring it in with a tuner. And that's another thing too, when we were getting back to that G90 I'm talking about. It's a radio with a built-in ATU, an automatic tuner, which is a very good tuner. It lets me cheat and get away with things. So hooked the 9-to-1 up to the first one, the vertical, and checked SWR on it, and that was hovering throughout the bands that I wanted to use, somewhere around 2.5 to 3.5 to 1. You know what I mean? So I know, okay, I can tune this and bring it in. I played around a little bit with compressing and bringing it up. Not much. There was times when if I brought it too close, it would, the SWR would get high. So just, by chance, stretching it as far as I could on a 10-meter pole, things worked out for me. So I was like, okay, this is great. I want to now build it as a dipole. So I got a hold of a 9-to-1 Ballon that a guy gave me, and figuring a Ballon for a dipole or whatever, and took two slinkies, and then took the 10-meter pole. And I was up on a parking garage there right by the harbor where I live, and got up as high as I could, stretched it out, used the 9-to-1, and found that SWR was even better. You know what I mean? It wasn't resonant. I had to use the tuner to make it work, but I was just blown away at how well the two slinkies worked. And, it was fun. That's, like I said, that's another part of ham radio that's so much fun. You get to find things like a slinky and build them. Another antenna, kind of I would call it a gimmick or a fun antenna I built like that, was I was working in Poland, and it was a Friday afternoon. We were done, and I looked around the room where I was at, and everybody's tape measures were on their desk. We'd been out measuring and building all day. And I said, you know what I'm going to do? I was like, there's 1, 2, 3. I had like 8 tape measures. I was like, we'll grab all of these. I had an idea. So I went back to the house I was staying at, which had a yard in the back, and I had a pole. I took my tape measure, because it was the only one I wanted. I didn't care about destroying, and I scraped the paint off at the quarter wavelength for 20-meter mark, right? And I taped it to the pole, and I took all the other tape measures and spread them out as long as I could. I had like 6 of them all around me on the ground, and I built a vertical out of 6 or 7 tape measures. I took just a alligator clipped it to the vertical one, and then another one off the side of the thing. And I get out. This is like Friday afternoon after work, and then right away I'm like sitting in the northeast of Poland. I'm like, wow! I checked SWR 20 meters. It's like flat. I'm like, I can't believe this is happening. So I get out and I start making contacts, and like this one guy, I'm talking to a guy in the UK. He goes, I don't believe you. He goes, there's no way you're talking. He goes, tell me what you're really using. I go, no, I've got like a tape measure straight up taped to a pole, and I've got 6 of them on the ground as counterboards. But he goes, you're 5.920 over right here, So it's like, how cool is this? You know what I mean? Just using the tape measures. The next morning I got up and made a contact long path to Australia on this thing with 20 watts in this thing. So that was kind of the predecessor to going over to the slinky. I was like, if I can make a tape measure antenna and talk long path to VK from Poland, let's try some other stuff. So I've done that. I did have a failure earlier this summer when I first got to Rhode Island. There was a big tower. It used to be like an amusement ride at a park here that it still stands. So I tried to fire that thing up and make this tower work, and that was a fail. And that's like I said, that's another part of ham radio is just trying. Sometimes you're going to succeed, sometimes you're not. And the tape measure antenna, the slinky antennas, they worked. They were wonderful. Call them a gimmick or call it what you want, but you kind of learn by doing, like, and experiencing it. And then getting over to that big galvanized steel tower that I went to that was a struggle. You know what I mean? It's it's all about finding out and experimenting. We can model things in a computer all day long and see that they work or whatever. I like to just do, you know what I mean? Because sometimes, and I always say this about radio and antennas, it's like health. It's like the medical field. When you sign that thing, it says medicine is not an exact science. I don't think antennas are either, because every location has different properties of ground, of what's going on. The ionosphere is different every second of every day when you're operating. Different antennas will react different ways. It's almost like medicine, man. You just let's apply the Band-Aid and see if we can heal it. Let's see if we can make a contact. And that's kind of my attitude when I build a gimmicky antenna or whatever and having fun. That's just it. I'm just having fun.
The mode that you're operating is single sideband, right?
All the time. I have started learning CW. I want to learn CW just for the pride of saying I can operate CW. I just love, I tell people all the time, Marconi spent his entire life trying to make the human voice go over a radio wave. Why are we going back the other direction? I'm not a hater of digital signals or CW and that, but it's kind of the running joke I have. I think the human voice was made for, the radio was made for the human voice. And that's why I like, when I talk to somebody on the other side of the world on the radio, I can hear their personality. I can hear them, their speech. Even like I'm talking to someone, and I love talking to Italians, like, hey, that you can feel the Italian in them when you're talking to them. And, and I love that because you really get to experience through the human voice on SSB, or for that matter, but AM or FM, but just the human voice over the radio, to me, is what it's all about. I've made friends now. I don't think if I was just strictly CW or strictly FT8, that I would have a friend on social media now, in Brisbane that I talk to every day. It's like, hey, Walt, how's it going? Because our voices met on the air.
You did a video on should hams own an 11-meter CB rig? And I thought that was an interesting question because I think for some of us who regarded CB operators when we were teenagers as a lower life form as we got our amateur radio tickets, I think it's an interesting question to ask now. What do you think? Do you think ham radio operators should own a 11-meter CB radio?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll be honest with you. I came from the 11-meter world of the, and I understand, and we always had that, hams think they're better than us thing or whatever. I went through a lot of years where I was just experimenting. I'll be honest with you, though, I've always been the guy that would operate, SSB with 12 watts. I was never the guy that, had a kilowatt and, keyed up and was just a jerk. There's a lot of them on 11 meters, but I love 11 meters. I still use it. As a matter of fact, here in my Jeep right now, I just installed a new 11-meter radio yesterday. That's an FM radio. I want to go down that path. I have a friend, as a matter of fact, we're going to meet up later today in one NUG. He's a ham tuber as well. It's channel 741 radio. And he's an 11-meter guy. And we're going to, he's in Connecticut, I'm in Rhode Island. We're going to drive towards each other with our FM CBs on today and talk, kind of like the Steely Dan song, no static at all, FM. That's what we're going to do today and have some fun with it. I think 11 meters is just a band between 10 and 12. It's no different than ham radio. It's an HF band. I know the personalities are there. I know there are some people in CB that sometimes I cut it on and I just cut it right back off because it's, it's foul. I know that's there. But I've grown up, I've had an 11-meter rig. When I started, like probably all of us did in the 70s with CB, I never stopped. I had one forever. I've always had one in my car. There's been times I know, especially like when the solar cycle's down and I fade away from it and don't use it for a year or so. And then all of a sudden shake the dust off and use it again. I think there's something there. I really think that ham radio operators should use it more. And I'll be honest with you. I think a lot of them do, and they don't say that they do, because I know a lot of guys, you hear some really good operators on sideband on what we call channel 38 LSB. And I can tell just talking to these guys, oh yeah, this guy's definitely a ham. You know what I mean? We're just using Q codes and talking to, his signal or whatever. So, I love 11 meters. A lot of people, it's funny. I've done a few 11 meter videos and I get hate comments on them. And I had one guy that I thought a whole lot of, said he unsubscribed or whatever. And I'm like, geez, man, it's just it's HF radio or whatever. So I just brush it off and keep rolling.
Are there still a large number of users, Walt, on Citizens Band? Can you actually buy a 23-channel or 40-channel Citizens Band radio now?
You can, and you can buy, like I said, I just got an FM. In 2021, the U.S. FCC just approved FM on 11 meters. So that's what me and my friend Bob are going to do today and talk FM. It's a new thing. It would be nice to see FM take off on 11 meters or CB because, you have GMRS and FRS and all these other things that are UHF, VHF, what have you. Is FM on HF would be even better. You know what I mean? So maybe it'll take off. Maybe it won't. I get excited about it. I like CB and 11 meters because the 40 channel and there is a really big 40 channel SSB kind of subculture that are around 30, what we call channel 37, 38, 39. The FCC, it used to be you couldn't talk more than 155.3 miles. The FCC here in the States I don't know how they figured they could control propagation and your voice not going more than 155 miles, but they eliminated that. And so now there's no law against talking long distance or skip or whatever on 11 meter CB, and that's gone away. The thing is that they did not eliminate the fact that you got to do it with a legal radio. You can't use one of these export radios or, with 80 watts or whatever. It has to be 4 watts AM or 12 watts PEP for SSB. Well, I've always been that guy anyway, so I still enjoy it. There's a whole radio subculture in the upper parts of CB that are great operators. You can, like right now, I could probably get on the radio and make contacts with the situation with the solar cycle right now or whatever. I could sit here all day long and talk through the Caribbean on CB radio, which is really cool. You know what I mean? I've actually made contacts the other way late in the afternoons, just as what we experience on 10 meters. Those guys on the 11 meters are experiencing the same thing. They're talking to Australia, the Pacific, or whatever here from the States in the afternoons on 11 meters. And there's a good group of operators in that world. And I enjoy dabbling and talking to those guys because that kind of is one of the things that made me finally get my ham license, because I would do that. I think through Solar Cycle 24, I was heavy on 11 meters. And as it started going down, I was like, okay, it's time for me to get off my lazy butt and finally just get my license and become a ham. And then so I can start using, 20 and 15 meters and kind of going down that road. So
when you're operating from the beach, do you have some kind of like a QR codes or something like that on a sign or on your rig or whatever, so that if somebody wants to learn more about ham radio, that you can send them to your YouTube channel or to one of your sites?
Yeah, I do have like stickers, my channel stickers on the side of my bucket that we talked about earlier with Coastal Wave Fires. And it's funny, guys will come up and they'll watch me and they'll see what I'm doing and they're interested. And I'll point to that sticker. I said, go to that channel right there on YouTube. That's my channel. And it's funny because you'll see them, they'll type it in on their phone or whatever and do it that way. I don't have that's a good idea though. I should probably get the one of those stickers with all the Q codes on it and put it on the bucket as well. Maybe that would be a good talking point with it as well. That would be fun.
There's some sites that allow you to make your QR code out of your URL. So if you have a YouTube channel or you have a blog or something like that, then you can actually paste that on the side of something, and people with smartphones can just go to your channel or go to the ARRL or go to whatever organization is promoting ham radio. Do you think that we're doing a pretty good job promoting ham radio, Walt, these days? Could we do a better job?
I think we're doing it's getting good. It's getting better. Full disclosure, I'm really good friends with the guys in charge of the ARRL right now. And, those guys, Dave Minster, the president, and Steve Goodgame, who's going out and doing his thing with it. Those guys are awesome. I talk to them quite a bit, and I see, like, let's take Steve Goodgame with the ARRL. He's going into schools, doing STEM stuff, is going into schools. I admire them for that. I think YouTube is really helping a lot. I think the growth of ham radio on YouTube, and I'm one of those guys, I think it's getting some popularity in the ham radio again. I don't know if it's going to save the fate of the free world or not, but, it's nice that it is doing something. I've said this before, too. I don't know if the size that ham radio is right now is such a bad thing. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be huge. We're enjoying it. I'm enjoying it. There's a community of people enjoying it. It's just big enough where manufacturers are still making radios for us. I've seen through, with radio in general, it kind of goes up and down, up and down. Now with the solar cycle on the rise, it's a great time for the popularity to get better. But I don't know that people have this thing.
We're not in trouble.
No, we're not in trouble. I don't think so. I think we're okay.
I think it depends on where you're at. Here in Israel, for example, I don't see that we're growing. Maybe we're growing a little bit, but we're growing the way we once were. And that's because cell phones and long-distance service and all that other stuff has kind of replaced what amateur radio was kind of used for in those days. But I like your attitude. I mean, I like the idea that it's such an amazing way to grow. There's always a problem to solve in order to do that one thing that you want to do better, and that's make contacts from the beach, for example. So I love that whole idea. Do you have advice that you'd give to newer returning hams to the hobby?
Yes, I would. My advice to new guys is don't overthink it and don't be intimidated. I've seen so many people in comments to me. I've talked to people, whatever, they're like, I can't do this. And I tell them, it's like, yes, you can. If a 7-year-old can memorize the answer to the questions and get his ham license, you as an adult can do it. And don't be intimidated and don't overthink. What really bothers me is to see salty old long-term ham radios, and we call them, for lack of a better term, people say sad hams or whatever, but the gatekeepers, and I have a problem with them. I really don't like gatekeepers. I've been the victim of gatekeepers telling me how wrong I was and how I was not doing it right and what have you. My advice to anyone is like, listen, it's your world and everyone else is in it. Like, get your license and go have fun. You know what I mean? It's like, you're not, as long as you're following the rules, if you pass that test, I don't care if you had to memorize A, B, C, D of every question. If you passed it, you got your license. Go have fun. Just, stay legal. There's nothing wrong with being an appliance operator. Go buy an antenna, go buy a radio. You don't have to build it. You don't have to, like everyone's saying, I built my first radio. I built this. And you see me building antennas. I hope that I'm inspiring people to build an antenna. You don't have to be that guy. There's nothing wrong with just getting your license, going out and buying a commercial radio with a commercial antenna, wiring it up and having fun. That's all that. Go do it. Go for it.
Right. Don't be afraid of failure.
Right.
I was having a conversation with my grandson. He's using a skill saw on a project. It looks terrible, but what I see as I'm going around the project, it's getting better and better. Every, foot he's moving down. And he's kind of a little embarrassed by it. And I said, the way we learn is from making mistakes. And I can see, as we're going along from one end of this project to the other, that it's getting better and better. And I think that, you can apply that to just about everything, including ham radio. And that is, the more you do it and the more mistakes you make, the better you become at whatever it is you're trying to master, including ham radio.
Yeah, I agree all the way. And it's all about doing. And like I said, going all the way back to my career to ham radio, it's like, I like to see people, build and try things and do things. And you don't have to be an expert. And I kind of like what I'm trying to add to ham radio is be that guy in between the expert and the hacker and whacker of wires. You know what I mean? It's like, just be the middle guy and let's get it going. Let's have fun. That's really what I want to be remembered for one day at ham radio, and what I'm trying to do now is just being an ambassador to encourage people to become hams, have some fun, cut some wires, build some antennas. experience the magic of talking to someone on the other side of the world and enjoy the hobby.
Well, I think that you sum it up very well. I'm going to put your TikTok channel, your YouTube channel, and your X channel in the show notes page so people will know how to find you and communicate with you as well and see the remarkable videos that you've produced. Walt, it was such a pleasure. I really appreciate your coming on the QSO Today podcast. With that, I want to thank you so much and wish you 73.
Thank you. The pleasure was all mine, Eric. Thank you so much. 73.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Walt. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in K4OGO in the search box at the top of the page. You can sponsor the transcription of this episode or any of the previous episodes by clicking on the transcription button on every show notes page. The cost is $75 per episode, regardless of the length. We will quickly transcribe the episode and give you credit for your sponsorship. Please send us the call sign of the podcast to make sure that we transcribe what you want. Remember that QSO Today is value for value. Please support our project by making a donation or becoming a listener sponsor today. Use our Amazon link before shopping at Amazon, as we receive a small commission on your Amazon purchases. Subscribe to our mailing lists, both my blog and the podcast, and forward the messages to friends and family who would enjoy QSO Today content. Promote us on social media and give us a 5-star rating and reviews whenever you are asked. QSO Today is available on every podcast player and venue, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and Podcasting 2.0. Get a Podcasting 2.0 player to make it easy to get your next episode as soon as we publish. My thanks to Ben Bresky, who, as the consummate artist, makes this host and his guests always sound brilliant. Ben also publishes a weekly Jewish history podcast. There is a link to that on the QSO Today homepage. Until next time, this is Eric, 4Z1UG, 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.